The chamber fell into chaos in an instant. James Comer's voice, red-faced, straining, furious, boomed across the room. "Shut your mouth!" The words weren't just loud, they were desperate. They tore through the air, bouncing off the walls like a hammer blow. Gasps rippled through the audience. Lawmakers froze in their seats. Journalists looked up from their notes, pens suspended in midair. It wasn't the voice of a leader in control. It was the sound of a man unraveling. The cameras caught everything. Comer's clenched jaw, his raised hand, the sharp edge of his voice. It was the kind of moment that defines not just a hearing, but a career. And across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, unflinching. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't blink. While Comer's outburst shook the room, Crockett's stillness held it. That contrast, his rage against her calm, was electrifying. For a split second, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. What would she do? Would she fight fire with fire? Would she snap back, matching his fury with her own? That's what Comer expected. That's what his scream demanded. But Crockett wasn't playing his game. She knew what millions watching at home would see: a powerful man screaming, and a black woman being told to be silent. That image alone told a story older than politics. And she wasn't going to let Comer write the ending. Her silence in that moment wasn't surrender. It was setup. Because Crockett knew something. Comer did not. When you let arrogance reveal itself, all you have to do is speak the truth, calmly and clearly. And it will pierce through the noise like a blade. And so, as Comer's echo faded, all eyes turned to her. She leaned forward, adjusted her mic, and prepared the response that would not only expose his lies, but leave his scream, hanging in the air like the last roar of a man who had already lost. The battle line had been drawn: rage versus reason, noise versus truth. And what Jasmine Crockett was about to say next would flip the entire hearing on its head. The countdown had begun. The silence after James Comer's outburst was deafening. For a moment, the hearing no longer felt like a political proceeding. It felt like a test of who truly held the power in the room. Comer thought his scream would dominate, that it would strip Jasmine Crockett of her voice and authority. But instead, it revealed something far more dangerous for him: desperation. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about one exchange between two lawmakers. Millions of Americans were watching, many already skeptical of Comer's credibility. He had spent months pushing allegations, weaving narratives, and trying to position himself as the arbiter of truth. Yet here he was, reduced to yelling at a woman simply for refusing to be silenced. Crockett understood this moment wasn't about her pride, it was about principle. If she let his command stand, it would send a message that truth could be bullied into silence. But if she answered with composure, she could flip the script entirely. The power struggle was no longer hidden. It was live, raw, undeniable. Viewers at home leaned forward. Lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Even Comer's allies looked rattled, realizing the optics were spiraling out of control. What Crockett chose to say next would not only defend her voice, it could dismantle Comer's entire narrative. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a showdown between integrity and intimidation, and everyone in that chamber knew which side was winning. James Comer's face was flushed, his jaw tight, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fury. "Stop talking!" He barked again, pounding his fist on the desk, like a man trying to claw back control that was slipping through his hands. His words didn't land as commands. They landed as evidence that he was unraveling. He leaned forward, wagging a finger, his voice growing louder and less coherent. "This is my committee. You don't get to lecture me." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a chairman supposed to uphold order and professionalism, reduced to shouting over a colleague whose only offense was speaking facts too sharp for him to handle. The room's energy shifted. A murmur rippled through the audience seats. Staffers exchanged glances. Even a few Republicans looked down at their notes, unwilling to meet Comer's eyes. He had crossed the line from authority to tantrum. The more he shouted, the smaller he appeared. Cameras caught every grimace, every bead of sweat forming on his temple. His performance was supposed to project strength, but instead, it painted the image of a man cornered, out-argued, outclassed, and out of patience. And then, the silence. Comer slumped back into his chair, breathing heavily, staring at Crockett with the look of a man who knew he had already lost the moral high ground. His meltdown wasn't just a momentary lapse, it was a collapse in credibility, playing out live in front of the nation. All eyes turned to Crockett. She hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to, because everyone in that chamber knew the balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. When Comer finally slumped back into his chair, the air was still tense, charged like a storm waiting to break. All eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett. Would she snap back? Would she match his fire with fire? Instead, she did something far more devastating. She refused to play his game. Her voice cut through the silence like a steady drumbeat. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her tone calm, deliberate, unshaken. "I will not be silenced. I was elected by my constituents to speak truth, and no amount of yelling changes the facts." The contrast was striking. Where Comer had barked and flailed, Crockett was measured, almost surgical in her delivery. She didn't need volume to command attention. Her clarity did the work. Every word was a mirror reflecting Comer's meltdown back at him. "You can shout all you want," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "But the American people deserve accountability. They deserve honesty. And they deserve leaders who don't confuse noise with leadership." A ripple of reaction moved across the room. Some nodded, others froze, but no one missed the shift. Crockett had flipped the power dynamic entirely. The woman Comer had tried to silence was now the voice of reason, and he was exposed as the chaos he had tried to conceal. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, catching the poise in her expression, the quiet conviction that made her words impossible to dismiss. Crockett wasn't just responding, she was reclaiming the stage, and doing it without breaking a sweat. By the time she paused, the silence wasn't tense anymore. It was reverent, and it was clear. Jasmine Crockett had just transformed. A moment of attempted humiliation into one of her most defining victories. The hush that followed Jasmine Crockett's calm words wasn't just silence, it was a reckoning. James Comer had expected submission, maybe even anger. What he hadn't expected was composure, so sharp it turned his own outburst into a weapon against him. For a long beat, he sat rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. The cameras caught it all. The flash of frustration in his eyes, the clenched jaw, the inability to mount an immediate comeback. It was the image of a man undone not by shouting, but by a refusal to be rattled. Crockett leaned forward slightly, seizing the moment. "This committee was not convened for theater," she said, her tone cool yet resonant. "It was convened for truth, and I will not apologize for demanding that we stay focused on the facts." It was more than a statement. It was a pivot. Suddenly, the hearing wasn't about Comer's authority or his interruptions. It was about what he was trying to bury under the noise. Crockett had shifted the spotlight back to accountability, back to the unanswered questions that Comer's tirade had conveniently tried to drown out. The audience, both in the room and across the country, could feel the gears turning. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a battle over credibility. And in that battle, Comer had lost the high ground. His attempt to silence her had given her the perfect stage. Now, she wasn't just defending her right to speak. She was embodying the very integrity and steadiness that millions of Americans long to see in their leaders. By the time she finished, the entire room knew this wasn't Comer's chamber anymore. Jasmine Crockett owned it. With the room now hanging on her every word, Jasmine Crockett did what great trial lawyers and seasoned public servants do best. She moved from defense to offense, armed not with anger but with evidence. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational, but the weight of her words hit like thunder. "Chairman Comer wants to shout me down because he cannot shout down the truth. she said, lifting a neatly tabbed binder from the table. "Let's look at the record," she continued, her tone sharp but measured. "The very documents this committee requested tell a story far different from the one being shouted across this chamber. Payments, dates, signatures, all of it is here. And all of it undermines the narrative you're so desperate to spin." The room leaned in. Cameras zoomed. Comer shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening with every fact laid bare. Crockett pressed on methodically. She cited numbers, pointed to inconsistencies, and read directly from the very evidence Comer had hoped to bury under noise. If transparency is really your goal, then why suppress what's inconvenient? Why silence the truth when it refuses to play your script? Her calm delivery amplified the sting. She wasn't grandstanding. She was dismantling. Every line exposed a crack in Comer's credibility, and every fact was a nail in the coffin of his tantrum. At one point, she glanced up from the documents, her eyes locking on Comer's. "You can interrupt me 6 times, 600 times, and the facts won't change. What the American people deserve is honesty, and I intend to give it to them." The chamber was electric. Comer, red-faced and visibly shaken, had no retort that could match the quiet authority of hard evidence. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just surviving his attacks anymore. She was rewriting the entire narrative, on her terms, in her voice, with receipts that silenced even the loudest heckler. And the silence that followed wasn't just his defeat. It was her triumph. The moment Jasmine Crockett closed her binder, the hearing itself felt secondary. What followed was an explosion, not in the chamber, but across the nation. Within minutes, clips of her calm yet devastating expose flooded social media. Hashtags like Dumber Crockett clapback and Dolph Truth over tantrums shot to the top of trending lists. Commentators on both sides scrambled to frame the exchange, but the images spoke for themselves. On one side, James Comer, red-faced, shouting, losing control. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, composed, armed with evidence, dismantling every false claim without raising her voice. TikTok users remixed her line, "You can interrupt me 6 times, 600 times, and the facts won't change," into sound bites layered over music. Twitter exploded with memes contrasting Comer's outburst with Crockett's calm precision. Even late-night hosts teased that Comer had argued himself into irrelevance. News outlets ran headlines within the hour. Crockett silences Comer with receipts. Hearing erupts as Crockett exposes Comer. What Comer had hoped would be a show of dominance had instead become a national embarrassment. But beyond the memes and headlines, something deeper resonated. Viewers saw a Black woman, often dismissed or interrupted, reclaim her voice in the face of institutional power. For many, it wasn't just political theater, it was personal validation, proof that dignity and truth can win even in hostile arenas. By the next morning, Crockett's words were being replayed in classrooms, community centers, and coffee shops. She had turned what was meant to be her silencing into a megaphone for truth, carried far beyond the walls of that hearing room. And Comer, his silence in the days that followed, said more than any denial could. In a political landscape often defined by noise, Crockett proved that integrity doesn't have to shout to be heard. As commentators replayed the exchange, one truth cut through: dignity is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. Crockett had turned what could have been a shouting match into a masterclass on accountability. She showed that facts, when delivered with conviction, carry more weight than any insult or interruption. Her calm response revealed the hypocrisy of those who try to weaponize outrage. By keeping her composure, she exposed the emptiness behind Comer's fury. And in doing so, she reminded the country that strength is not measured by volume, but by truth. For millions watching, the lesson was deeply personal. How many have felt silenced in their own workplaces, communities, or even homes? Crockett embodied what it means to reclaim that power, not by meeting disrespect with more disrespect, but by standing tall, refusing to waver, and letting the truth speak louder than the noise. In the end, her victory wasn't just over one man in a committee room. It was over the idea that bullies get to define the stage. Jasmine Crockett had shown America that justice has a voice, and it doesn't need permission to be heard. As the echoes of that hearing fade, one truth remains clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended the principle that truth cannot be silenced. In the face of hostility, she chose clarity over chaos, evidence over ego, and calm over rage. And in doing so, she turned the tables not just on James Comer, but on an entire system that too often tries to drown out voices like hers. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a blueprint, a reminder that when armed with facts, conviction, and composure, one voice can reshape the entire conversation. Crockett's courage lit up millions of screens because it resonated with something we all crave. Leaders who stand firm even when the powerful scream, "Shut your mouth." But here's the real question. What do we do with that spark? These moments only become movements when people like you refuse to let them pass. So if you believe in dignity over noise, if you believe that facts must outweigh fury, if you believe voices like Jasmine Crockett's deserve to be amplified, then don't just watch, act. Share this video. Drop a comment. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this fight for truth. Because when we raise our voices together, the bullies don't stand a chance. And today's viral moment becomes tomorrow's history. The silence that followed James Comer's meltdown wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far greater.